I'll introduce myself. I'm James. I'm a PTSTA. Co-creativity is something that really inspires me, something I work with a lot. It's the basis of the work I do in training, in supervision, and in my therapeutic work. I'm a psychotherapist. And I also, as I've mentioned, I teach. In the area of teaching I am interested in is helping people work towards their CTA exam. Yeah, and I'm really interested in process, in group process, and what co-creative TA can bring to that. And that's me.
I'm Paul Robinson. I'm a PTSTA in the educational field. So I work with supporting adults to learn mostly about themselves and mostly how to get on better in organisations and communicate better. And I use co-creative TA in all my work. So we did a workshop last year at the Cumbrian Conference on co-creativity, and it went really well. So we thought we'd do something this year that focused on just one aspect of it, which was the shared responsibility bit.
Yeah. Because within co-creative TA, there's 4 principles. First principles of we-ness, about both being okay, and that actually what goes on in the room is a product of what goes on between both of us. And the second principle's shared responsibility, which we're going to talk about a lot. Paul's just showing the screen for that. And the next part of that is present-centeredness. It gives us a way of working in the here and now and noticing what's going on around process. And I think the ideas of present-centeredness are really, really potent for our work, with ourselves and also when we're with others in group. And the fourth aspect of it's respect and unconditional positive regard, mutual positive regard, which is, again, another aspect of I'm okay, you're okay. And it's really, really important in our work. Do you want to say something more about that, Paul?
Yeah, I think it's worth saying that it comes from Carl Rogers, really. It originates with Rogers. He talked about unconditional positive regard in a therapeutic setting, and working with co-creativity for quite a number of years, I always thought it missed the bit about okayness, and unconditional mutual positive regard seems to me to embody a bit more than okayness. So that's why I added it to the list as a fourth tenet.
Yeah. So would you like to talk a bit about contracting then, Paul?
Yeah, I'll stop sharing. Have you guys come across co-creative principles before, or is that the first time you've seen them?
Yeah, I've certainly seen it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the things with co-creativity, to enable it to work really, really well, is dealing with the psychological level of the contract. Which means generating or agreeing some sort of contract and exploring the things that get in the way of us being co-creative. Principally in getting in the way of us being present-centered. Because if we can be present-centered, we can share responsibility, we can be we, and we can treat ourselves and other people with positive regard. If we're not present-centered, then that significantly acts against us doing the other three. So a contract is really helpful to enable people to be invited in and to join in into a co-created space. So if I can share the screen again. I think there are some invitations that invite us to be in the co-created space together, and that challenge some of our defences. So we invite you in this 2-hour session to work and learn together with us, to share the responsibility for the learning to take place. Yeah, so we're looking forward to learning from you guys as well, and from each other.
Yeah.
And we invite you to be present-centered and account for our past experiences of learning that may get in the way, because we've all gone through a schooling system where we learn to adapt and do what the teacher told us to, and be good people, not get into trouble, and do our homework. And Keith Tudor's written and spoken quite recently about how much our schooling affects our script, about how much it encourages us to adapt over a long period of time. And because we experience schooling, we found our own ways of getting recognition and strokes for being at school. And that can really get in the way of adult learning. And we invite you to treat everybody in this group with positive mutual regard, and to have regard to ourselves.
Yeah. And there's something really important about, sharing responsibility for the learning, so that actually we all need to contribute to this. Yeah, we've all got a part to play in this. It's really important. And of course, in traditional teaching scenarios, quite often the teacher delivers what's to be learned and the students learn. And that's not really very good for adult learning. And just invite you then to sort of use being present-centered to notice when that might be going on and what you might be doing with Paul and I as the facilitators, and enabling yourself to be present. And that's really relevant towards the subject of the workshop today, because it actually radiates out into how we are in the world.
And of course, often teachers teach and the students don't learn anything because they're not interested. Or they're thinking about the football match last night, or what we're going to have for dinner tonight, or looking out the window. So it's really being present-centered in a learning environment is really helpful.
And on that present-centeredness, the important thing about that is being able to catch ourselves when we slip into a past I place. It can be really useful to watch our processes as we're present today, and when Paul's just put up the diagram about present-centeredness. And just to notice when, for example, Paul or I can slip into the past just as easily as you can, and really useful to notice that in the process. And how we can both end up at the bottom of the diagram, Paul. Both of us can slip in, both I and others can slip into the past. And it's really useful to then notice and to look at that, reflect on it, and to get ourselves back up to being present I, present you. But that attention to our process is really important and will be important today in the work we do.
If you've not come across this diagram from Tudor and Summers, this one in the middle should actually be at the bottom of the diagram.
Oh, sorry, yeah, true. What happened there? Yeah, it should be down there.
Have you come across this model from Tudor and Summers at all? Yeah, I'm getting a few nods.
No?
No?
No.
For me, it's an absolutely brilliant way of thinking about transference in a really simple way without getting lost in volumes of technicalities.
Mm-hmm.
And it's really practical. You can do it on the hoof as you're with people. I couldn't begin to work with, for example, Patricia Clarkson's model of transference with all the different sorts. That would do my head in. Whereas something like this is really, I think, a really simple, practical way of thinking about what's going on transferentially for us and for others.
And if you've not come across it before, you can find it either in the Co-creative TA book by Tudor and Summers or in the TAJ article in 2000. With, of course, quite a lot of narrative around it to explain it.
Yeah.
Lots of scribbling going on.
Yeah.
Which is fine, it's good. So I'm just wondering whether to just share what we decided to do today.
Yeah, can do that.
Just so that you've got, for those of you who like some structure. This is what we're hoping to provide an experience of, some understanding and experience of co-creative TA, to explore this particular principle of shared responsibility, to explore the defences that we may engage in to defend against shared responsibility, and begin to be curious about how we might find a way that through this sharing responsibility to prevent the connections across the world, and how we can use co-creative TA to support those connections by sharing responsibility. So we've done a little bit of the first bit, just saying hello and a bit of contracting. We were next going to have a bit of a break around on relevant theory. We're going to explore responsibility aspect of it with an exercise that we're going to invite you to do. And then we're going to have quite a wide-ranging discussion about what you find out and what you bring back into the room, and explore some of the theories around co-creative TA, particularly integrating adults, which is Tudor's model, considering archaeopsyche and exteriopsyches as opposed to parent-child ego states, and looking at winners and drama triangle and how the drama triangle from a co-creative perspective can get in the way of being co-creative and sharing responsibility, and how we can use the winner's triangle to support it,
Yeah.
to support the shared responsibility. So that's our plan. Is that exciting you? Yeah, that's good. So a little bit of explore our own theory around it.
Yeah. Yeah. Perhaps just start with a little bit of thinking about what we mean by responsibility. Yeah. I wonder what others think the word responsibility means for them. Anybody like to say something? And there's not a right or wrong answer here. This is just about, what does it mean to you?
Sometimes I think it means taking the blame. It
Oh, wow.
can have an implication of taking the blame. I did it wrong. I didn't do it.
Oh, wow. Yeah. 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 Anyone else talk about what it means to them?
In a similar vein to Chris, really, it's like shouldering the burden. The buck stops here.
Oh my goodness. Yeah. Yeah.
I was thinking about how my actions affect others and accounting for that.
Yeah.
I guess it's like agreeing to what you're responsible for.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it can be a sort of divvying up. Well, I'll do this and you do that. Or together we decide we'll do this and we'll do that.
Yeah. Which is interesting if we think of shared responsibility, isn't it? Rather than divvying up, that we actually share it. And what does that mean? Yeah. Yeah. Anyone else want to sort of say what it means to them?
I was just thinking, I think it means to have a voice. If you've got responsibility for something, whether it's shared or not, then you're having an impact on it. Your thoughts are relevant to whatever it is you're being responsible for, whether it be a relationship or a project or what have you. And actually, it's an opportunity that maybe needs to be embraced rather than
Yeah.
I was thinking about the codes that we sign up to. That ethical and moral responsibility was the first thing that occurred to me. And there are codes published by lots of organisations that we belong to, and I think our moral code probably goes above and beyond that in terms of things that we accept as a responsibility.
Yeah.
Maybe everything about the choice we make.
Yeah, that's really interesting too. Yeah. Yeah, because I have a sort of a reframe of responsibility, really, which ties in perhaps more with Sam and Svetlana's comments. And there are the comments around all responsibilities about blame and who should be doing what and what various people's duties are. But I think if you take the word and split it up and say responsibility, there's something about a personal requirement to be responsive. And I think that's really important. And it is a choice. And it is about how relevant is that in what we're doing, and that we are able to respond. And one thing I observe doing quite a lot of group work is I'm quite often wondering, how come people in this group do and do not respond? What is that about? One of the principles of Tudor and Summers and co-creative TA is, you know, the goal of therapy is not just autonomy, but it's also harmony, which is our need to be in relationship. And this very much speaks to responsibility. And how come we do or we do not respond? Because that's a call to be engaged with others and to engage with others. And I've spoken about this now, Paul, and we were going to talk, I was going to say something about this a little bit later, but I think it might just help think about, well, what bits of TA theory then might be relevant in the light of what I've just said. So I'd like to invite you to sort of think about what might help us in our thinking about this in terms of TA theory.
For me, there's something around the ego state from which a person is operating. You know, taking responsibility is probably not so easy from maybe a child ego state, probably easier as an adult. And as a parent, you might be maybe taking more responsibility or responsibility for others, perhaps.
Yeah, well, that's very true.
I was doing a bit of pondering over the last few days about just thinking back about responsibility, and I suppose where I was getting to was that usually with responsibility, it's a symbiotic relationship. Either you're responsible or I am. And the person who's not responsible falls in line. So as we are kids, we're not responsible for anything when we're very young, and our big people are responsible for everything for us, for our survival. And as we grow up, big people teach us to be more responsible, and they give us jobs to do so that we learn about responsibility. So linking back to what James was saying, we tend to either take responsibility for things or accept that somebody else is taking responsibility. So it sort of becomes a symbiosis, maybe without an administrative professional contract, but at the psychological level, responsibility is very often a symbiotic relationship, an unspoken one.
Yeah. And in the same way within TA, we quite often think of we-ness as a symbiotic relationship. And yet what we're talking about here is, you know, not that polar, I'm completely responsible or I'm not responsible at all, but there is a shared responsibility. And what does that look like? And it is then to do with our capacity to respond. And that's about being active in relationship.
And if we're going to share the responsibility, what is it that we really have to do?
Be explicit.
Sorry, say that again, Chris.
Be explicit. Be clear.
Yeah, we've got to communicate.
Yeah.
In order to agree what we're each going to do and which bits of the task or the project or cooking dinner, which bits are we going to do, and which bits are our partner's going to do, and maybe even which bits are the kids going to do. And that can be quite a challenge sometimes.
And I think inherently there is quite a challenge. You know, when you think of us being in a group now, or when we've been in other groups or in training groups, what gets in the way of us being able to communicate, to be responsive, to be present in the group? Yeah. And of course, if we're not present in the group, and therefore perhaps we're not in adults, what then is going on? What bits of theory might we use to think about that?
I suppose we are a little bit fearful about unknown people that we don't know.
Yeah, yeah, that's right. Yeah. So there's one of the things that gets in the way is there is a certain fear that's present. Yeah, that's true. And we'll come back to that and we'll talk about that some more.
Of course.
Our script, oh, sorry, is our script matrix
Mhm.
and how we've learnt to be in the world, how we've learnt to.
Yeah, yeah, very, very much so. And it's that thing Paul talked about the earlier about what can get in the way of learning, and it's our past experience of learning, because that's just script. And going back further, the script that was formed in the very early stages of our lives is what actually tends to drive what's going on in the here and now. And of course, in that case, we're working from what Tudor and Summers would be a past I place. And again, we're not. I think it was, who was it? Was it Chris that talked about it? We would then not be an adult, of course.
And, you know, if we think about some of what we learned in TA and around our script, we all have a particular place in every group. We, at an unconscious level, we know our place in the group because we grew up knowing our place and developing our place in our extended family. So at an unconscious level, when we're in a group, we are vying for that position of our place in the group. And of course, what sort of complicates that also is birth order, doesn't it? Whether you're the eldest or the youngest or the middleest, or because that will affect our place in a group at an unconscious level.
So in terms of thinking about that, then what bits of TA theory might you want to use? And we'll all use different ones. We'll all have different bits of TA that we like to talk about this. What bits of TA might you use to think about it?
Drivers and injunctions.
Yeah. Yeah. Again, linking very directly to the script matrix. Yeah.
Oh, don't be important.
Yeah.
Yep.
Don't be important. Don't be seen. Don't be able.
Yeah.
Discounting.
Yeah.
So we do a lot of racketeering in groups. Particularly to enable us to find our preferred place in the group.
Can I ask a question? Is it a preferred place, or is it a place that we're familiar with? So, as in the place that we had in a group within our family.
Yeah, I suppose I suppose I think they're synonymous, really.
Okay.
Yeah, whether we call it a preferred place or a normal acclimatized place,
Okay.
it is at an unconscious level a preferred place.
Mm.
Even sometimes consciously we may not like it.
Mm.
Because after all, somebody with a be strong driver doesn't really want to be invisible.
Mm.
But that's the pattern, is to be invisible. Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's not where they really want to be.
I'm just wondering how relevant personality adaptations might be in this scenario.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
So the same pulls. I mean, personality adaptations, drivers, they're just different models for the same sort of process. Yeah.
Yeah. I think maybe in a way, personality adaptations is useful in thinking it's the way, perhaps it expresses the position we had in the family, perhaps to some extent. And by expressing that personality adaptation within the group, it enables us to take up a certain position in the group. Whether it's being the one that stands on the outside, never wants to come in, i.e. perhaps creative daydreamer position, as opposed to, perhaps a passive aggressive approach. So there could be quite different ways of being. Perhaps it structures our way of being, maybe.
So if we sort of follow that argument, when we establish ourselves in our familiar pattern within a group, we then want to defend it. Mm-hmm. Which prevents us from being present-centered.
Yeah.
I was thinking, is there? I was reading recently somebody who's saying is, the media or social media or celebrities dominated by extroverts. Mm-hmm. That's how he described them. Mm-hmm. And I wonder if there's a sort of global personality adaptation taking place, and where does that leave room for other personality types or quieter types? If the global scene is dominated by extroverts, there's kind of a split going on, isn't there? I think.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah, and I guess even from global just to a group, the same thing happens in a group. You'll get those who want to be very present in the group and very vocal, and there'll be others who will want to stand back and be very silent and be very passive.
But the only thing I would say about that, being vocal is not quite the same as being present.
Indeed not. Yeah, I agree. Yeah.
Also, being silent is not the same as being passive.
Yes.
Yeah, agreed. Apart from looking at the idea of responsibility, how come when we're with other human beings, we do not respond? What keeps us back from actually being present and responding? I'm often struck in groups when somebody says something which really has a big emotional impact and everybody stays silent. And I wonder what is going on here. That somebody's suffering. Sorry, carry on, Sam.
Sorry, judgment.
Yeah, that's definitely a major part of it.
I really think there's people, and especially, I know in Zoom, since we've been doing this for a year now, there seems to be an element of social boundaries breaking down. So, like you used to call it a keyboard warrior on social media, I think in Zoom meetings you get more and more of a similar thing. I was on a training session the other day and someone was quite blatantly with their phone doing this. You wouldn't be in a training session face to face and have that happen. And I think And I've noticed that I work in a school. I've noticed it with the children. They don't listen the first time I speak. They don't look at me. You know, if I clap my hands, whereas I used to clap them once and they'd copy it. Now I have to do it 2 or 3 times for the children to engage. So sorry, what I'm saying is I think judgment, and it's really hard, especially if somebody's telling you something over Zoom, especially if it's really sad, or it's really affected them, and if you've got no experience or anything like that. And I think while Zoom is brilliant, it allows us to carry on with this sort of thing. I do feel our genuine intentions can sometimes be misinterpreted. Does that make sense?
Say more.
Okay, I think face to face you get more, you can see more of the person, so you only get to see the shoulders. And isn't there something about like 70% of what we communicate is non-verbal, so you get, I think you get the more authentic person face to face. Zoom works, it's a stepping stone, you know, it helps us by all means, but I do think there's a certain element when we're in a group like this, that I think there's a fear of judgment. And what if I say the wrong thing? Everyone knows more than me, is more experienced than me. I think that's just my thought on it anyway.
Yeah, I think that's an important thing. And I think it's a way in which our script actually manifests itself with us in the here and now, and how it eventually impinges on our capacity to be responsive in a given environment.
I think that what also goes along with that in a different tack is fear of getting it wrong.
Yeah. Well, with the outcome, you'll be judged for getting it wrong.
Yeah, and you feel shamed.
Yeah. Yeah.
So we keep quiet.
Yeah.
Yeah, but as one of my teachers always used to say, better to keep your mouth shut than open it and let people know you're an idiot, you know. So we keep quiet just in case we get judged and we don't like it.
I was thinking about what James said about in a group, if somebody shares something really painful and then when nobody responds, and is that something about fear of just not wanting to add to the pain, fear of, you know, something definitely around fear of saying the wrong thing, and so not saying anything in the face of something, you know, really huge. And I think we see that in all sorts of situations where people, you know, don't know what to say when somebody tells you some awful news, so they choose not to say anything.
Yeah.
And how actually that can be more painful because there's something about acknowledging that pain or accounting for it just in a transaction, I think.
Yeah, I think
whatever that might be, and it's not about a right or wrong transaction, it's just about something.
Yeah, it's just, you know, if you think about it, transactions at their very basics, they are an acknowledgement of somebody's presence, and for it not to be there at all, it can be devastating for the individual in question and really counterproductive towards moving forwards and making change happen.
Was that the negative stroke thing on that matrix there was? When you get a negative stroke, and it's a sort of, you are, I can't remember the word it. I did it so long ago. Well, not that long ago, but it's a sort of acknowledgement of someone's a negative thing of somebody.
Well, it's why, you know, children and adults go for negative strokes rather than none.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because there's acknowledgement that exists.
Yeah. And we tend to think of negative strokes having a much bigger impact for the equivalent positive stroke.
And one of the reasons for that, of course, is that negative strokes tend to reinforce part of our script.
Yeah.
So we might not like them, but actually they're reinforcing some script belief or other.
Yeah, and so there's a familiarity about them.
So I think the other bits are theory, TA stuff around. I've mentioned racketeering, but and playing games. We play, we do play games in groups and in transactions to maintain our script positions. And if part of our script is about our place in a group and about what we are or are not responsible for, then we will be playing games to reinforce those beliefs. And we'll be inviting people to racketeer with us to reinforce those script beliefs about our position or what we are or are not responsible for.
And I think that propagates out into wider, bigger groups in which we're members of, up onto a global scale. So that same process plays itself out.
So I'm being conscious of the time.
Yep.
And being conscious that what we planned to do was to invite you to do go into groups and do a bit of a work on your own and a bit of an explore in order to feed the second half of the workshop. Are you up for a group session, a small group session? Yeah, a bit of an explore.
Can I just check, when we're in the small group sessions, are they being recorded?
I don't know. You'd have to ask David. I don't know that you can record the individual group, the breakouts.
Yeah, I'm not asking for them to be recorded. I'm just.
I'm just saying. I don't think it's possible. I use Zoom quite a lot, and it doesn't record the breakouts.
Okay, I was just checking because this is being recorded, isn't it, as we speak?
Yeah,
now?
this is. Yeah.
Well, we can check with David as well and make sure
Yeah.
when he appears again. Yeah.
So if I share my screen again.
Okay.
Here is the exercise. So we invite you to spend, in effect, 20 minutes as a group, as a small group, and explore your experiences of sharing responsibility when it's not on an equal footing. So more like the symbiosis we were talking about earlier, when you're responsible for something and the other person expects that, or somebody else is responsible and you take the back seat and you let them be responsible. So spend a bit of time exploring what's that like. And then also another second part of it will be, what's your experience of sharing responsibility? And particularly, if you can, try and separate shared responsibility from an agreed perspective as opposed to an assumed perspective. So try and recall and review experiences of agreed sharing of responsibility. Sort of explicitly rather than at the psychological level. And then it's bringing that together. Be curious about what gets in the way of sharing the responsibility.
And as a way of sort of thinking about that, think about when you were in groups and when you were silent and when you engaged and what was going on for you that decided whether to engage or to not engage. Yeah, to just give you a sense of what gets in the way. How come I don't just join in? For example, I quite often observe groups when they meet socially outside and they chat, absolutely engaging 20 to the dozen. and they come into a process group and there's deadly silence. What's going on? What is it that happens in that scenario? What stories are being told? What narratives exist around being in a group? Yeah.
Are you up for this?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Okay, so my suggestion is, what is it now? Coming up to 3:10. So if we come back together at half past 3.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And I invite you to take a loo break or make a cuppa or whatever it is you want to do along the way within that, and come back at let's say 1:30, and we'll explore how we can support. So I think we're all back.
Yeah.
So we're really interested to find out what you find out.
I think certainly one of the things I was discussing is the idea of an equal footing, and the fact that there seems to be very few instances in my life of where that seems to exist, and that I guess different people have different frames of reference on that. So yeah, I was scrabbling to try and find an example of where things were on an equal footing, actually.
And I wonder, is there a distinction between the reality of the power balance and the assumption made about the power balance?
Yeah, there's certainly a sense where I can think of areas where I'm, in fact, the majority of them where I'm assuming it's everyone thinks the same thing, but actually I know there are ones where they're not.
Yeah, that's right. Because it's that aspect of it, the bit that engages the sort of the psychological message, the script aspect of it, that can somehow muddy the waters around that. And I agree with you, actually, in many cases, an equal footing is not a common event. And
actually, I mean, that's very often we spend so much time communicating about the task, for example, but not necessarily about that balance or whether it's equal or, about the relationship.
And that's where the assumptions kick in. Because there's that sense of, well, everyone knows what the rules are or what the balance of power is. Yeah. So, someone else.
The example that I brought to my group was for the last 40 years, I've been a semi-professional musician singing and playing in bands. And there's nothing quite like the shared responsibility issues that arise in a band when, for example, I'm the lead singer. I've got to learn 2 hours worth of lyrics and arrangements on my guitar, whilst a drummer just turns up and plays the drums. Doesn't no disrespect to drummers really, but they're a constant theme of conflict in my bands that I've been in. And then not only in that, in terms of the equal footing is a big issue. And that, how does that work? From the lead singer to the drummer to the bass player, having different levels of responsibility within that little hierarchy. And it's a very strange dynamic. You get 4 or 5 people thrown together in this project, and and over the years I've been in various bands, various breakups over very minimal things, and I've lost where I was going with that now. Yeah, I mean, it's more the shared responsibility, more than just making music as well. It's about equipment, about booking gigs, it's about traveling, it's about promotion. Who does that? And invariably you see power balances emerging and altering all the time. It's almost like I could become a specialist counsellor, I think, for bands, what I know now.
I think it's a really, really good example, because Tudor and Summers talk about shared but not equal responsibility. And I think what you're describing, Mike, is a very much of a shared responsibility, where that lead changes from the singer to the guitarist to the drummer to the oboe player, to, you know, the electric guitar player, to the, you know, piano player or whatever. And at different times in a group or in a song or a particular song, you know, the guy on the keyboards may be controlling the pace, yeah, and maybe the yeah.
That's a very good point. Yeah.
Yeah. So I think it's a really good example of a shared but not equal responsibility, because it depends on who's got the most experience for that particular task, or who is it that leading this particular song. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's a really good example of a shared, not equal responsibility.
And of course, at the centre of it all, really, at the heart of the pureness of making music, is a theme of co-creativity. It's a pure version of it, really.
Yeah, and it's about being in relationship with the audience.
Mm.
So it's a wider shared responsibility. You know, are you really going to carry on playing one type of song when the audience is not listening, or are you going to change? Are you going to try something different? Yeah.
Yeah.
Is there something in our nature as humans, though, to look for an alpha, to look for a leader? When we talk about, because this idea of sort of trying to iron out hierarchy, when actually I think there's something in us that actively seeks it out.
Mm-hmm. I suppose, I mean, what would you do if nobody took the responsibility to lead or make decisions? So I think it's something that happens because something goes wrong. It'll never get put right unless somebody decides that they're going to take some responsibility and put it right. And
we do live in hierarchies, don't we?
We do.
We can't. That's part of our evolutionary biological history.
And we're born into a hierarchy.
And with that, there's power. So, I mean, the example I was just thinking of at the end in our discussion was around climate change. And one of those issues that it's like, whose responsibility is it? Gets put back on the individual and feel a bit powerless in the face of it. But yet, where's the kind of conversation about, you know, people taking, you know, about the big players taking their responsibility? But yeah, and also on a smaller level, I was thinking about work meetings as well, and how things don't get explicitly agreed, but there's that kind of assumed who's going to take responsibility for something. Yeah, and I've just got questions around it, really, about why that happens and where the power is.
And perhaps it's also about where the assumed power is, and the assumption that I don't have the power, and therefore there's no point in saying anything, which is the sadness of that sort of process. Because I have no responsibility. I cannot respond. I'm unable to respond when it does call for a response.
And Byrne talked about 3 aspects of leadership, didn't he? Like the psychological leader, the appointed leader, and the administrative leader. Yeah.
I wonder, is there a fourth? Because I was thinking about what Tom said about climate change and Extinction Rebellion. Is there a rebellious leader? Because you know, that's risky in a way, isn't it? And yet they've achieved a lot in a short period of time. Some brave individuals who go against the flow and who stand up. Sometimes in history, that's maybe needed.
Yeah, and I think in Byrne's classification, that would be the psychological leader.
Yeah, I'm thinking of that opposition leader in Russia at the moment who's been imprisoned, where he is the rebellious leader and he has put himself at considerable risk.
Could you list those 3 again? Byrne's leadership.
The responsible, the psychological, and I think it's the administrative.
Other experiences then?
I have good TA therapist, so I have experience of shared responsibility in our therapy room. I think also is maybe in medical services, because the patient is responsible to apply knowledge and guidance that he gets from the doctor. I'm not sure. There is also that kind of power of knowledge, power of profession, but also shared responsibility for the health.
Mm.
And Steiner talked about 7 sources of power, and knowledge being one of those, and and communication being one, and sharing that power. I mean, Steiner wrote about actually being in the middle of each of those as being the most powerful place, but also being the least powerful.
Mm. I wonder, in the discussions that you had about your experiences of it, what ego state did you imagine you occupied? Were you in adult, or were you in child, or were you in parent? And what was that about?
I can only say I felt our group, I certainly felt in adult, maybe not everyone might agree with that. I felt our group, I felt we had an adult conversation. We were in adult.
Mm.
And the conversation got better as it went on, more engaging.
Mm.
Yeah.
I was also thinking about your experience of, when you were recalling experiences of being in group where the responsibility was equal or not equal. In your experience, what sort of ego state would you have been in?
I think where I'm concerned, I probably do have a bit of a temptation to slip into adaptive child, a bit of sort of throwing the toys out of the pram, getting annoyed, that sort of thing. Yeah, and I think the power dynamic has an important role to play in the role we then take up.
So one of the things we ask you to think about is having had those sort of reflections on shared responsibility when it's not equal and shared responsibility when it is sort of equal. What gets in the way of you sharing responsibility? Did you come up with any gems, any nuggets?
I think I was going to say that I think this Zoom or other such is an example of that, but I think that speaks really of difficulties in communication, really.
Mm-hmm. Well, say a bit more.
I think, you know, I've been in plenty of meetings where you've got people who, for example, have got really poor internet connections, who drop out, who don't seem engaged. And I know what I'm like. I just tend to end, well, as you've seen, I tend to end up speaking, tend to end up also taking responsibility as well for things. Oh, well, sod it, I'll just do it. It'll get done then. You know, that kind of thing, which of course then leads into me being more annoyed and adaptive as things go on, I guess. But I think it's probably because of poor communication, really.
Yeah, and I wonder what are there other things that can cause poor communication in addition to just the physicality and practicality of it?
I think assumption. I certainly know if something isn't going right, I think it's because of this. So yeah. Definitely before I started TA training, and whatever reason it was that I thought this, I had a reason that I thought it, and that was my reason. Might not share that reason with anybody else, but that was my conviction. This is why, it was my assumption, and that was it. I think now what I really try, and it actually annoys my friends, if you know, because us women really like to gossip, perhaps a little bit more than men in my experience, without being sexist. And sometimes if somebody would say something, you go, yeah, but maybe this and maybe that, and I guess get the look, because like, no, we like to have this assumption. We don't like to think of it as a potentially a different frame of reference. We don't, you know, we like to think that we've come up with a reason for this and we've justified it, and that's what we think. Don't know, I might sound really evil now, but I think assumption has a lot to play, and not a lack of willingness to think about a whole array of reasons why somebody might have taken a course of action.
And is it also about the way you behaved about it, which was actually to share it? That there might be, you know, another perspective on this. And of course, once you put that into the mix, it then has an impact.
Tom, you were going to...
Yeah, I was going to say something about not being skilled to communicate in that way as well, because we're not used to it. We're so kind of trained to be with those kind of hierarchical structures of somebody taking responsibility and the others being passive, that it's quite difficult to enter a space where everybody takes equal responsibility and is explicit about that. And I might have got a kind of question for myself going forward about how to break that down, really. I don't know. It's because it takes practice. It's almost like a practice.
Because I think one of the sadnesses is, if we look at the way our culture works and our education system works, it trains exactly that response. We are trained to give our responsibility to others and do as we're told. And you're right, I think that there is then quite a, you know, it's quite a change to then move to a shared responsibility.
I was mentioning the idea of rights and responsibility as well, and how that's shifted, or may have shifted over time. So, you know, we have the old concepts of duty, and then perhaps over time we come to a bit more of a response, my right, you know, well, I know my rights kind of thing. And getting the balance between them. So, you know, doing one's duty might be playing by the rules and not rocking the boat, or, you know, a hierarchical thing, or I'm wondering about things. Or I was trying to link it a bit to empire building and those kinds of ideas. So we've had a sort of shift. And what's the balance between this is my right, my legal right, my ethical right, and my responsibility? I don't quite know where I'm taking that, but I'm sure it's a little bit related to what you said before I started saying it, which now escapes me. Hierarchies and power, and yeah, when you hear those sort of ideas of, oh, I've been disrespected, and then I quite want to think, well, where's that balance between, yes, your right to be respected and your outget your responsibility as well as in something in a social way. So that was a bit rambling, actually.
Yeah, but there's a sense in which, you know, people do have rights and they do have responsibilities. Yeah. But of course, those rights and responsibilities are often structured within the hierarchy.
Yeah.
Which then enforce or insist on an adapted behaviour. And therefore, if you move out of that, you're then seen to disrespect the hierarchy.
I think it was a good point in terms of power, Chris, that if we are in a co-created space and we are sharing responsibility, we've lost our power. Because we can no longer predict what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And that's one of our script places from being small, is that we want to know what's going to happen. How often do kids, when you're watching a TV program or a film, my kids always used to say, "What's going to happen, Dad? What's going to happen? Tell me what's going to happen, Dad." Yeah. And, you know, it's like, are we there yet? Yeah. Kids are always wanting to know what's going to happen. And we take it on board, and we still want it. We still want to be able to predict the future. And that's a fantasy. Because we can't. And if we're in a co-created relationship and we're sharing responsibility, we've got to relinquish that power of knowing that we can control the future or we can predict it, because it's no longer predictable if we're sharing the responsibility.
And it is then a complete step out of script, because you move then to a position where there are only possibilities. If you're willing to then share and move into that space between each other, then things can happen, but you don't know what they're going to be. They won't be scripted. And you have to risk what's going to happen. And that, of course, can be quite a scary place for us to be in.
It's one of the bases of co-creativity is constructivism. And one of the things of constructivism is that we want to be able to know what the story is going to be before we get there. We like to write the story going forward. And of course we can't if we're being co-creative.
So do you, when you're working in that way then with a client, do you as individuals, do you make that really explicit to the people you're working with? You say, somebody might say, "Oh, I don't want to have that phobia or something anymore." And do you actually say, "This is the way I work," and we don't know how that's going to go?
Yeah, very much so. It's very much inviting, as we invite you today, to be in that space and risk responding and seeing what happens, and taking the risk that something will come out of it. And of course, you, as somebody said earlier, you risk being judged, you risk getting it wrong, you risk appearing to, not be competent. We tell ourselves lots and lots of stories, and the sadness of those stories is they silence us, and that we become inauthentic as a consequence of that.
I think what it does provide us with a great opportunity to do is to concentrate on the process and not the content.
Yes. And invite you to think now what goes on for you as we are in discussion with each other, and what holds you back, what enables you to speak, what is actually happening. Not for the purpose of you judging yourself or inviting anybody else to judge you, but just to notice, this is what I get up to, and be curious about it, with a view to finding a way of becoming more authentic.
earlier on we mentioned drama triangle and winners triangle.
Mm-hmm.
And if one of the challenges for being co-creative is to get out of the drama triangle, and we can do that by getting into the winners triangle. And a major part of the winners triangle to support co-creativity is the vulnerability. Is being prepared to be vulnerable and sharing that vulnerability. Because that is really scary.
I can't think of how many people, when I've talked about that, have sort of said, well, being vulnerable is being weak. I don't want to be weak. If I'm weak, I will be attacked. And we will all have our fantasies that stop us allowing ourselves to be vulnerable in the moment.
And it opens up lots of new possibilities.
Mm. Yeah.
So I'm going to share screen again and share a model you may or may not have seen. This is a model from Trudy Newton that was adapted or adopted or brought into an educational context from Sills and Mazzetti, who looked at it, who developed it from a psychotherapeutic relationship. And really linked into the co-creative relational field. And it really reminds us what we do bring into the room. That we do bring into the room and bring into the field, the relational field, everything from our past. All our defenses, all our experiences, and the invitation is to account for the good and the positive experiences and not be defensive because we had defenses to prevent us feeling the bad bits. So to really account for those good experiences where we have shared responsibility and we've been vulnerable and we've got some really good results. Because it's our early experiences and the meaning we made of those early experiences that have generated a lot of our script beliefs and a lot of our patterns about keeping ourselves safe and predicting the future. So it's sort of being conscious of those defenses that we have.
Yeah, and it's our defences and our need for the structure, so we know what the outcome's going to be. Would it be useful to look at integrating adult as a consequence of how we move through that? Because within co-creative TA, it's a very different view of ego states.
Slightly better.
Because we see the adult ego state as an integrating adult. It's in process of bringing into awareness what's in the exteriopsych, which was Burns' original word for the parent ego state, and for the archaeopsych, which was the original word. It's not quite the correct way of saying it, but the original word for the child ego state. And it is about bringing those experiences into adults so that they can be either used if they're useful or not if they're not. And that's how we use the stuff from the past. And while the stuff from the past just emerges out of child without being processed through the integrating adult, of course, we're just in script still. So it is about becoming aware of what actually limits us and being able to bring it into awareness and process it. And in effect, of course, redecide how we respond. Rather than responding in a script, rigid way, we adapt to the current environment, account for the current environment, and respond out of adult. Do you want to say some more about it, Paul?
Well, we're just going to pull up the neo-psyche. Well, the integrating adult as opposed to an integrated adult. And have an explorer of what Tudor includes being in our integrating adult. So he includes in an integrating adult things like being imaginative, being in contact, being in full contact, intuition, which we normally think of as being in the child ego state.
Mm. And of course, Graham Summers also talks about, we quite often think of adult as being in awareness, but Graham Summers also talks about the non-conscious aspects of the integrating adult, which is material that is available to the integrating adult, but may not necessarily be in current awareness. And of course, it's a very different model of ego states from any of the others.
And Tudor has got non-conscious in brackets in the neo-psyche. So it's about accounting for the fact that the non-conscious is affecting and influencing us in adults. And we can become increasingly aware of it if we work on accessing that non-conscious part and the influences from our non-conscious on our adults. And Tudor has added some more bits into this since this one. So some more recent things. He includes things like homonymy. It's already in this one. He also puts things like curiosity in there. So some things in an integrating adult we would often think about as allocating it to a child ego state.
And so the model is actually very, very different, where you see the archaeopsych and the exteriopsych as actually being pathological. And effectively, once they're taken in and become part of the integrating adult, they then cease to have a scripty impact on the adult.
Can I ask a question? So thinking about vulnerability then, when those aspects come into the integrating adult, we needn't think of it as a weakness.
No.
I can't quite say what I want to say. It's to do with our vulnerability. I can't quite get hold of what I want to say, but it's really important.
Just have a go.
I've gone into a don't think.
Hmm.
Yeah, rather it is definitely to do with this thing then of not seeing it as a weakness, some sort of profound pathology, or that was going to fall to pieces. More to do with those aspects of ourselves. I don't want to call it softness, but of the whole of something. To make up the whole, not a weakness.
Yeah.
So I mean, I don't know. It's not in this one, but again, in one of the Tudor's writings, he puts in here, and certainly Graham Summers talks about groundedness, which Steiner also talked about as a source of power. So being vulnerable provides us with an access to feeling grounded.
Yeah.
Because accessing our vulnerability reduces and removes some of our defenses.
Yeah. And also substitutes those defenses with a much more adult orientated, I can be vulnerable and look after myself. Because for some, of course, if you're vulnerable, you get attacked. And this is, I can be vulnerable and I will look after that vulnerable part of me. I can care for myself. Yeah. We are coming quite quickly to the end, Paul.
We are, yeah. So, how are you doing? There's never enough time in a 2-hour workshop. Whatever it is you're doing, there's never enough time. So we'll not beat ourselves up.
We haven't sort of spent a lot of time on thinking about, well, how does this apply globally? But I think it does apply globally in terms of, what is our response going to be? And I'm very struck by Steiner's work, who back in the 70s was writing about this stuff in the context of feminism and in the context of society generally. And what he was saying was that the context of our lives is really important. And he gave up doing individual therapy because he thought, actually, we need to have group therapy, and the groups need to be orientated towards changing society. And there is something about that there is a need to respond to what's going on. And that will be outside of and contrary to the existing hierarchy that says, actually, just be peaceful citizens and keep your mouths shut and do as you're told.
I'm just wondering whether I can do a final share, a quick share. With another very quick model. And you've all got these handouts, by the way.
They came in the email.
Yeah, they came in the email from David. So this is a transformational learning and change process from Jack Mezirow. And what we are facing at the minute is this disorienting dilemma. What do we do on a global scale? How do we respond? And the second part of this process is about a self-examination with feelings of fear, anger, guilt, or shame. And that, so it's an invitation to explore our own process about maybe how we share responsibility, maybe how we respond in an accounting way from our integrating adults, and access those genuine feelings that are being covered up by the racket feelings that we have. When we don't share, when we don't speak out, when we do go to being invisible, what is it that's underneath? What are those feelings that we are trying to not see, we're doing our best not to access because we don't like them. In order to account for them and be more in our integrating adults. Co-creativity is a fabulous tool. It's a fabulous space to be in if you can access it. And it's not easy. It's really challenging because it challenges who we are. And it invites us to write a new narrative about ourselves.
So in the last couple of minutes, I'd invite you to sort of, check out in some way or other and be able to say goodbye to each other.
So unmuting yourself will be helpful.
Yeah.
I've really enjoyed today. Thank you very much. It's been a pleasure working with all of you. So thank you, and thank you so much for the handouts. That's really helpful.
Yeah, thank you.
I was just thinking how there's a lot of food for thought, so it's kind of feels like a bit of a tip of the iceberg, but really interesting, and just it's brought kind of a lot of sort of piqued my interest. So thanks, really good.
Well, we achieved the objective, James.
Yeah.
I found it very thought-provoking. I'll take quite a lot of way to reflect on, I think, after this afternoon.
Yeah. Yeah.
Really good session. Really enjoyed it, gentlemen. Thanks very much. There's a massive amount here that I can take back to my client work. So job done in that respect. Some new ideas. I've not heard of co-creativity before, but really good.
Oh, thank you.
Yes, thank you for that. It's continued to enliven my interest in co-creative stuff, so I should be definitely doing some more research into it. Thank you.
Yeah.
I mean, if you're interested, I know Graham Summers is doing quite a collection of seminars, Zoom seminars, which are really good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'd seen that. Yeah, I think I probably will go and have a look at that.
Where do you find those?
Just Google Graham Summers on his website. There's a list of dates and sessions. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm really glad I was here today. So thank you. Found it really thought-provoking and profound at times, and got a lot to take forward, and we'll research it more as well. But it just feels like it's really important for where I'm at, but also globally. It does feel like this is really important stuff.
It is.
Yeah, I've had a really good afternoon. Thank you so much. Really good.
And there are always good sessions if you guys join in and share the responsibility.
Yeah, that's what makes them good.
I felt like I was in the first session of a group therapy with you. Thank you very much.
Yes, I really enjoyed that, and time flew, which is always usually a good sign for me that I'm engaged in something. Even my laptop crashed, but I managed to get it back up again, so I apologize for that. But it made me think also, quite a few links there. I'm interested in Buddhism, about vulnerability, that about encouraging people to stay with their vulnerability. Really is the key, is the key to our work, isn't it, in a way?
Yes, very much so.
And our lives, actually. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I'll say thank you as well. I'm in my first year of training, and it was really accessible, but also hugely rich. So I'll go away and follow all the leads. Thank you very much.
Yeah. Thank you.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Stay with your curiosity.
Yeah.
It's an invitation. It's fantastic using co-creative TA, and it's challenging.
I think, as Lawrence has said, it's really rich. I'm feeling slight kind of levels of indigestion around it. So I think I need to go away and try to absorb some more. Definitely lots more learning to be done. But great afternoon. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks ever so much.
Thank you,
Back
everyone.
in the plenary in 15 minutes, is it, David?
It is, yeah. I was just going to say the plenary is in 15 minutes. You will find it's the same link, but just for the safety's sake, if you go onto the Cumbria Conference website and follow the link from there, you'll get into the plenary in 15 minutes.
Okay.